You want to write a queer antagonist. This is not an easy task, especially with the history that us as queer people have with being antagonists in popular culture. Because there's been quite a lot of queer coding through the years, and that is mainly as antagonists. I'm looking at you, Disney. I'm looking at Ursula. I'm looking at, why is the only one that came to mind? There's a lot. And this is a hurdle as queer people. We want to be multidimensional. We want to see the rights and wrongs of queer people in media because it makes it more interesting. So today we're going to be looking into that. In case you are new here, hello. My name is Bridget. I am a queer writer and filmmaker from Canada. And on this channel, we talk about queer writing and all the stuff that comes along with that. So today, we are talking about writing queer antagonists. This is a complicated topic, and we are going to be looking at it through an allegory of a breakup in a coming-of-age movie. We are going to be looking at this in 3 different parts. We're going to have questions, as per usual, at the end of each part. And so, let's get into it. I don't know what this hand is doing. It's going crazy. Part 1. Acknowledge the baggage. This is the part where we're going to talk about all the history. Whoop whoop. Now, when you are writing a queer antagonist, it is vital to take into account the history that we have of being antagonists. And the social situation, the social archetyping that this comes from. Now, I recently finished reading a book called The Bad Gaze, which I would highly recommend reading. I think it is a really cool resource. And I think it came from a podcast. So I'll leave a link to the book and the podcast in the description. But this book is a really good resource because it looks at the lives of people throughout history who, through uncovering things about their relationships, are seen as queer, like Hadrian of Hadrian's Wall in the UK, and like Alexander the Great. Where are the others? The FBI guy. Yeah, I can't remember all the names, but I'll leave a link to the book in the description. And I think that this is really an interesting way to look at things because in the tagline of this book specifically, they talked about the fact, not the tagline, the introduction to this book. They talked about the fact that we as a community claim Oscar Wilde as a part of our community. And yet we do not claim his boyfriend, Bosie, as part of the queer community because of all his horrible acts against Oscar and against other queer people. And this creates a very... It feels strange to use the word toxic when it comes to like this kind of subject, but it does create this very misleading image for queer people and this expectation of perfection that we can never really live up to. And so diving into the very problematic gaze of history is really a great way to take those blinkers off where it's like all queer people in media have to be moral, they have to be perfect morally. And that doesn't make an engaging character. And when we're wanting to make queer antagonists, this is even more vital because through reading this book, it really opened my eyes to the different beliefs that people can take on through their lives by who they are surrounded by their childhood and through the different political states that they grow up in. It's very interesting the kind of there can be internalized homophobia, there can be simply like greed. There's all different ways that people can be gay and also not be morally great. Like, it's not something, they're not mutually exclusive, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not sure if I'm using that terminology right. One of the best ways to keep things from falling into this like perfection, like every queer character has to be perfect, and to avoid the archetype of queer people being bad throughout history, is to make sure that your queer antagonist is not the only queer person in your story. I know it sounds so obvious, but it has to be said. Don't only have one queer character and them be the antagonist, because that just sends the message to like the conservatives that all queer people are bad, and we still struggle with these things in media. And I think it is also important to remember to be careful what identity you give your, like, within the queer community. Remember to be careful which identity you give your antagonist, because some, I know, like, can be annoying to take into account like politics and everything, but it is a very political thing to write queer stories. And so when you are writing a queer antagonist, you need to be considerate of what identity you are giving this antagonist, because different groups of people in the queer community are more vulnerable, and we don't want to be punching down on different parts of the queer community that are already under attack. So I would encourage you to keep that in mind. I think that going even further, I think it is important to keep in mind which groups have been represented more, and try not to give like the groups that have only had like a little taste of representation an antagonist. It's like, just circling back, it's like, yeah, maybe don't just give them an antagonist, because that's like all the representation they have. And that doesn't feel great. So just bear that in mind. Would recommend. Now, looking at our allegory, we need to consider what actions your antagonist does to classify them as a villain. This is the point in the story, or like this allegory, where your character, who is not the antagonist, the main character, acknowledges what the antagonist has done. And even if they haven't like confronted them face to face, they know that their morals don't align with the antagonist's. So what are the actions that your antagonist has done that causes this reaction in your protagonist? That's the big question. As a writer, we need to remember that it is not the identity of your antagonist that makes them the antagonist. It is their actions. This is even more vital with having a queer antagonist. I feel like I need to close the blinds because the sun is like right in my eye. Hold on. Okay. All right. I think that should work. I want to give the example of Catra from She-Ra and the Princess of Power. I'm going to try not to give too many spoilers if you haven't seen it yet. I mean, it has been a few years, so if you haven't seen it yet, you gotta go watch it. It's on Netflix. It's easy. But Catra is one of the major antagonists for most of the show. She is a very fiery character for a lot of the show. And her sexuality is always kind of hinted at through most of the seasons and then confirmed like by the end. I think it was kind of obvious for a lot of people, but not for others. So by the time she fully confesses her feelings for the main character, she's had her like redemption arc, which is great. But she becomes the antagonist through her constant pursuit of like capturing the main character and like fully, I think she like fully dismantles like reality or something. Like in season 2, it's like everything's disintegrating and she's like, I couldn't care less. And like, oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, she's not doing great things. But the key to this is that her actions are the source of this. She has not done great things, and we need to remember that it is their actions that make them antagonists. That's pretty much all this example was. So, okay, I just looked at my script and we're going to have questions at the end of the video. We're going to cover all of the material and then we're going to have questions at the end. More like journaling prompts, because I want you to like write them down and answer them for yourself. So let's move on to part 2. Part 2, what are you wanting to say? Writing a queer antagonist is a very loaded decision to make about your story, so we need to be intentional. These characters can be a mirror for your main character, they can also be a foil, or they can just be a flat out, like, I mean, usually they are like the polar opposite of what your main character is trying to do, so there is that. There is a common trend, sort of, with queer stories, with stories that have queer antagonists these days, where they have redemption arcs. I am mainly thinking of Catra from Shira and Agatha Harkness from Agatha All Along. And these two characters, they start out really like, they're not the friendliest. Catra is pretty friendly with Adora, but everybody else not so much. And this does send the message that there is hope. This is a hopeful story of being accepted and finding found family. It is moving away from the tragic stories that we've seen throughout media history, and that's really great. I think that it is important to have both sides, though. I think the main thing we need to stay true to is, 1, the characters, and 2, the message that we want to send. Sometimes those can conflict with each other. Sometimes it's like, if your message is not necessarily about queer characters, it is more about like a moral overall, like it doesn't have to do with the character's identity, they just happen to be queer, then you can kind of take that a little bit out of account, but it still should play into the story in some respect. I think that it is important to take it into consideration, and again, remember, they should not be the only queer character, because we are not having a bury your gays trope. I'm not encouraging any of you watching this right now to bury your gays. But that mainly pertains to when there's only like 1 or 2 queer characters. Pretty sure. When we're looking at our allegory, our fun little allegory, this is the point where your main character is looking at the actions of your antagonist, and maybe there is a redemption arc going on, and they're considering if they want to keep this person in their life. Have their actions been so bad that there's no forgiving them? Is there like room for them in the main character's arc? So this is kind of the turning point. Redemption arcs are very powerful when it comes to villains. I think that it's often used because we want to have hopeful stories. I think that tragic endings don't really have as much of a place in our current social climate because people want escapism. I don't think that it is helpful to have tragic queer stories in the current situation because we have enough of that in our everyday lives. And so having a queer antagonist who goes through a redemption arc and gains some kind of self-love, has a found family, and gets to ride off into the sunset is really reassuring, because it means that all of us can have that. If this person can have it, then we can have it too. Okay, now let's move on to part 3, which I'm calling Analyzing Where You Stand. And this is the part where we are going to go into our little journaling prompts. I encourage you to take out a notebook and write these down, or take out your notes app or something. And we're gonna look at some questions that you can ask yourself, ask your character, and this will help shape them into an interesting antagonist. Now I want you to answer these following questions, there's 3, as your character. Number 1, what wounds am I carrying? Number 2, what do I hate about the way that I act? And is there something I do that I wish I could stop doing? And number 3, are there things I've done that I regret? And now I want you to answer these questions about your character. So you're writing from the writer's perspective now, not your character's perspective anymore, but as the writer's perspective. Number 1, what message does their backstory carry? Number 2, is there a lesson this character learns, or do they fail to learn a lesson? And number 3, how does their sexuality show up in the story? Okay, now we've covered a lot of history stuff, and I want to kind of summarize what we talked about. So yeah, we talked about the history of queer antagonists, talked about opening up the playing field of bad gays and how having tragic endings is not really popular right now because we don't really want to be sadder. We want to be lifted up these days. And lastly, we had some journaling prompts. I hope you wrote those down and you're working on them. Keep those in mind. I want you to remember while writing your antagonist that no one character should carry the identity of the whole queer community. You need multiple queer characters in your story if you have a queer antagonist. So they all get to carry different parts of the community. It should not all be on one character. That is all I have for you for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful. I enjoyed diving into this one. As I said, I just finished reading The Bad Gays. Highly recommend that book. Again, I'll leave it down in the description. And I am relaunching my Patreon in April. If you are interested, drop a comment down below, hit that subscribe button. And the first 10 people who sign up for a paid subscription on my Patreon, any tier, will get free feedback on some of their writing from me. So yes, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will catch you next week with the final video in this series. Keep writing. Bye.